The elderly, the seasonal out-of-towners, the people in the hospital. They all use absentee ballots to vote since they can't make it to the polls on Election Day. But what if you live in a remote county where convenience isn't really a priority for a polling place? That option to vote may go away if the absentee bill makes it to the governor's desk. With all these 400 and something bills out there, it seems like there's a lot getting done at the State House. But is there? Well, Democrats asked and answered that question today, and surprise, Republicans don't agree with their conclusions. Idaho has one of the strictest abortion laws in the country, but there are other abortion-adjacent laws that are restricting more than just a woman's right to choose. It's affecting art.
Those people do this for a living, and they're telling us that what we're doing is the right thing to be doing. That's my thoughts, and I would not pass this bill.
And those are the thoughts of Republican Representative Chris Allgood from Caldwell. He was opposing a bill to restrict who qualifies for an absentee ballot. So why? Well, because he's following the testimony of Idaho's Secretary of State, Phil McGrain. You know, Phil McGrain, the guy who got more votes in the last election than any other candidate across any other race. Well, McGrain told the committee absentee ballots are safe and secure in Idaho. He also added they're a crucial tool for people in remote parts of the state who wouldn't or don't live near conveniently a polling place. And despite no widespread evidence of voter fraud in Idaho, the bill to limit absentee ballots passed committee. An amended version of the bill has floated on the State House floor for weeks, on the floor, House floor that is, for weeks now. And the discussion about absentee ballots, well, it doesn't seem to stop at the State House. You can be concerned about election integrity, sure, but are absentee ballots the problem? Here's Andrew Bartline.
The discussion around absentee ballots is growing in Idaho, and the unofficial motto around Idaho's elections hasn't moved an inch.
The mantra is easy to vote, hard to cheat, right?
Tim O'Donnell represents a group called Election Integrity Idaho.
And that's what we're concerned about is cheating enough that it changes the outcome of an election.
Are you confident in our elections?
I think Idaho is in pretty good shape compared to other states, but that's a pretty low bar. So I think there's things that we can do to secure things, and the absentee voting is absolutely number one thing we can do to secure our elections here.
That's why O'Donnell supports House Bill 205, sponsored by Republican Representative Joe Alfieri. The bill would restrict absentee ballots only for active military, people who are sick, disabled, or hospitalized, those at work or university, a religious mission, or anyone occupying a second home.
My main objection is, how do we enforce that?
Kathy Ackerman is the Idaho County Clerk.
It's concerning to me that people think that we're just mailing ballots, randomly to the public and not keeping track of who receives a ballot, who it's intended for, and whether that ballot, who it was intended for, comes back from that person. So part of that is a signature verification process. So we are checking that.
What place do these absentee ballots have in rural Idaho?
There are limited opportunities for public transportation, for one thing. Sometimes people just don't have an ability to get to their polling location. Idaho County is huge. If you've looked at a map, you can see that.
But O'Donnell says it's not the same as voting in person, where poll workers have eyes on every ballot at all times.
But when you drop it in the post office box, we have no visibility of those ballots at that point. The Postal Service is a union that is basically endorsed Joe Biden for president. So anybody who's Republican wants to hand their ballot over to a partisan organization, I don't think that's wise.
You believe the Postal Service is a partisan organization?
Well, I think their union is. They endorse the candidate.
It's not a shared concern among Ackerman and other election workers in the state, including Secretary of State Phil McGrain, because they say there's no evidence of any widespread voter fraud in Idaho elections.
For what that's worth, I'm not sure, because sometimes people are convinced otherwise, and it doesn't matter what I say. They're going to be convinced that there's fraud, whether we can prove it or not. So that's a challenge.
O'Donnell derives a lot of suspicion about election integrity from the Heritage Foundation.
Heritage Foundation is a think tank. It's a conservative think tank. Conservative legislators, Republican legislators should at least acknowledge their argument.
But their argument in the gem state only reports 10 instances of voter fraud.
There's no fraud here in Idaho.
The most recent
This is a waste of time,
was 6 years ago.
right? If it hasn't happened in Idaho yet, great. We don't really know that, but let's close the door so we don't, it's just a matter of time before it can happen. So why leave the door open?
Governor Brad Little also expressed his support for absentee voting because of the value he says it provides to rural Idaho. I think a debate upcoming, his exact words were, he's not all too excited about it. He said that a couple weeks ago. We expected to see House Bill 205 on the House floor today. That bill did not get debated or received a vote, but it is still floating around waiting for action. And we asked Ackerman, Brian, what does absentee voting look like in Idaho County specifically? She said of 11,000 votes, this was last November, 917 of them were absentee. So it plays a role, but this idea that absentee voting is taking over regular voting, the data just isn't there, and not even in rural parts where it has the most utility from what we've heard from election workers.
I mean, I do the math great. It's about 10%, a little less than 10%.
Roughly, yeah.
Yeah, amazing. The question I have is for Mr. O'Donnell. Does he give Christmas cards to his mail carrier? That's what I'm curious about. I would wonder if that.
We can ask him, Brian.
How his mail service might be. All right, thank you very much, Andrew.
Clerk will lock the machine and record the roll. 57 ayes, 12 nay, 1 absent, excused. Majority having voted in favor of House Bill 242. House Bill 242 has passed the House.
And that was that. The bill that adds a human trafficking element to Idaho's slew of abortion laws passed the House today. House Bill 242, as you heard, would make it a crime for anyone to take a girl across state lines to get an abortion without their parents' permission. A jaunt that could get you charged with human trafficking, something the Attorney General says he plans to prosecute. That bill is now up to the Senate side to see if it makes it all the way to law. Another bill that passed the House floor today is House Bill 265. That bill would ban minors from accessing sexual exhibitions. In other words, showing up I guess at a drag show that would be kind of showing something that might be considered obscene, as well as prohibitive live performances containing sexual conduct. Those can't be performed at public facilities like parks and from using public assets. So that one is out there, something like a drag show. And that bill also now headed to the Senate side of the State House. So the bills centered on our country's culture war are making progress. But what about all the other stuff? The stuff more Idahoans seem to care about, based on policy surveys and viewer messages, like property tax, grocery tax, teacher pay, budgets. There's still time for those to make progress, but today would mark the last day to get those things started. It's called the legislative transmittal deadline, a target date for lawmakers to stop introducing new ideas in committee in order to be able to finish up everything that's already out there. It's not a hard deadline, though. But based on what we've seen so far, Idaho Democratic leaders say it looks like there's a lack of focus on Idaho-centric issues from the majority party. GOP leaders say things are fine. This is fine. Here's Joe Paris.
Idaho lawmakers have a target of being done for the year in a little more than 2 weeks. Idaho Democrats are speaking out, saying late in the session, real work needs to get done.
This has been a 2-month-long Fox News fever dream.
House Minority Leader, Democrat Alana Rubel, believes Idaho lawmakers are taking cues on culture war legislation from voices outside of Idaho.
Legislation is being driven by national right-wing talking points rather than the actual needs and wants of the people in this state. Tucker Carlson's latest monologue is a far better predictor of what will appear on the agenda in this building than what actual Idahoans really want and need.
Rubel identifies legislation on library content, regulating drag shows, and bringing back the firing squad as topics that Idahoans are not calling for prioritized action on. Democrat leaders believe special interest groups and cable networks are impacting discussions on Idaho issues like property tax and infrastructure.
We really want to bring that focus back to the people of Idaho, what they need, the kids or schools, the schools their kids are going to, the money that's in their pockets, the property tax checks they have to pay, the things that will actually change their lives and not satisfy some headquarters smoky room somewhere out there in America that just wants to make a project out of seeing how many states they can pass these things in.
Democrats are calling on the heavy majority-led GOP legislature to focus on issues Idahoans want taken care of. But GOP leaders tell me they're on top of the issues Idahoans care about. House Majority Leader, Republican Megan Blanksma, responds to the comment that Republicans are obsessed with dealing with social issues first.
I don't think it's a fair comment because I don't know that we are just focused on social issues. We have some days where there are quite a few that come through and others that we don't. I think that probably what you're seeing is lack of knowledge of what's moving. If if you look at the board, what we're sitting there holding are appropriations bills, which means we're trying to clear out anything that has come through committee, through a policymaking committee, before we move on to the appropriations bill. So it's just a question of ordering. It has nothing to do with the bad set of priorities at all.
Blanksma says the early action at the State House this session is simply based on what is fleshed out and ready to be discussed.
I think it's just what was available and what we could move early in the session. There's been no effort to necessarily keep things from moving. And right now we're just in the process of ordering bills so that we can move the House bills into the Senate. And I would argue always that the Democrats' priorities are not what the vast majority of Idahoans want for priorities, as we are in the supermajority as Republicans in the House.
Democrats pushed on that concept, saying important issues shouldn't be held to the end.
We have all these important issues and they're always left to the very end, and then we don't have proper time for the public to weigh in, for us to really think it through, and then we have to make a decision based on haste and pressure, and that's not good governance.
Unless you can get everything worked out at the very beginning, so we're going to run it in January and all parties are on board, then yeah, it takes time and it takes multiple drafts because you want people to concur and you want it to have a smooth path forward, and that takes a lot of negotiation.
We believe that the most important things, the things we prioritize the most, should be the first things addressed. They should not be left to get the scraps of what's left over after everything else has been dealt with.
I think they overestimate people's interest in necessarily the national talking points. The national talking points are the national talking points. What we're trying to do is address specific constituent concerns, and you'll see that in a lot of the legislation. I would be thrilled to show you my email, which comes from actual Idahoans, because they put their address on it and they tell me what their concerns are. So I think that the vast majority of issues that we're addressing are coming from concerns with constituents or concerns within state agencies on how to better address concerns that are within the greater state of Idaho.
So that transmittal deadline was technically yesterday. And again, this is more of a soft deadline, but Brian, it really is a message really to all lawmakers in the Capitol that they are trying to wind down. And I mentioned a date, March 24th, that's 2 weeks from Friday. That's kind of when Idaho lawmakers say, all right, that's when we want to have all the business done. Now, will that happen? It's truly wait and see. There's a lot of appropriation budgets and a lot of nuts and bolts that still need to get done over there, but it's wait and see. But there's a chance, I'm told, from Republican majority leadership that they think they're going to be out of there.
We talked about this yesterday, of the 400 plus bills that have been introduced. I know a lot of them still in committee, won't go anywhere, but only 11 have been signed into law by Governor Little so far.
Yeah, and there's a lot of, I guess, process bills that are kind of just working their way through the process. I think a lot of the time we highlight legislation and topics where there's debate back and forth. A lot of the appropriations, the budgets, they take time to get through, and they're just, honestly, it doesn't make great television, but those are working their ways through, and they have been since January.
All right, thanks, Joe. We'll keep track of all those. Appreciate it.
They've been hunting for the oldest person to name it after. I'm 86, they found me.
Made it 10 more years after that. That was part of former Governor Phil Batt's speech after an Idaho Department of Transportation ceremony. That's when they named that building after him. He knew how to have fun, and he was loved by a whole lot of people. Governor Batt passed away Saturday morning on his 96th birthday. Governor Brad Little's office said Batt died peacefully at his home. They said he will be transferred to the Capitol coming up on Thursday, and he's going to lie in state in the Capitol Rotunda until 10 a.m. on Friday. Then at 11 a.m. on Friday, Batt's funeral will begin at the Cathedral of the Rockies. The public is invited to attend that funeral. Afterwards, Batt will have a private burial with his family and friends at the Wilder Cemetery. In the immediate aftermath of Idaho preventing any public funds being used to perform, provide for, or promote abortions, there was concern on how this might impact Idaho's public colleges and universities. That law was passed in May of 2021. Then you may remember when the University of Idaho put out a memo to its employees reminding them of that law in the fall of 2022 on how they could face felony charges if they violated it, and even threw in don't recommend condoms for birth control either, just in case kind of thing. Well, Idaho's No Public Funds for Abortion Act and the collateral damage on college campuses didn't stop there. A new art exhibit at Lewis Clark State College Center for Arts and History opened last week. It's called Unconditional Care, Listening to People's Health Needs. But just before the show opened, the school sent a letter to 3 artists saying their exhibits violated Idaho law, the one that bans public funds to promote abortion. That letter was similar to the one-sentence statement that was sent by the school to us today from Lewis Clark State College. After obtaining legal advice per Idaho Code Section 188705, some of the proposed exhibits could not be included in the exhibition. That was it. Idaho Code Section 188705 is the No Public Funds for Abortion Act, and the school used a kind of loose interpretation of the term abortion-related activities, according to the ACLU of Idaho, and the artists whose pieces were removed. One of them is a Brooklyn-based artist, Lydia Nobles, who spent the last couple of years recording women's stories of pregnancy and their decision to get an abortion or not. Then Lydia would create a sculpture to go along with their story, one that represented a chair, say, in an abortion clinic waiting room. 4 of those testimonies were supposed to be included in the LCSC gallery show until they weren't. Lydia spoke to us today from Brooklyn about learning how she would be excluded from the exhibit and why this is a problem.
I remember, I think the worst moment of my life,
Kat's story,
by far,
is just one.
It's just being alone in a house with a newborn baby.
Of many Lydia Nobles collected for her series, As I Sit Waiting.
And I was 18 doing this, to get a diaper because he was crying because he had a wet diaper.
Stories of abortion access or a lack of it.
I had a lot of complications after that pregnancy.
So my intention is to present viewers with unbiased information about someone's experience. So each interview is very much memory based.
They'll just say, "Oh, give the baby up," but they don't talk about the pressure to keep the baby.
So they're just walking you through as if you were telling your mom, yeah, I found out I was pregnant and then this is how I felt. And then they also share details of who they told afterwards and what that was like and were people in their life supportive or not.
I knew up group I would have no support.
The day before she was told her videos would be removed from the Lewis Clark State College exhibit, Lydia says she got a phone call from the gallery director. What did she ask you?
She asked me if she felt like my works were promoting abortion.
And what did you say?
I told her just simply that they were unbiased accounts of someone's experience. I don't think that it falls within the statute of because to me, when I interpreted the law, I was like, okay, so you're standing in front of someone who's currently pregnant and you're promoting abortion or telling them to get an abortion or this is how you can do it.
When they sent you that letter that said you're no longer part of the exhibit, I mean, what did they specifically say? Did they give you a specific of how you would have violated this law?
No, I tried to ask them more questions, asking which specific parts of the caption or the videos violated it so that maybe I could change it so that it would be in accordance with the law, and they never responded.
How do you think about this law being used to kind of remove art pieces from exhibits?
I think it's really disappointing it's an attempt to silence people's perspectives, and it doesn't allow people to create their own opinions about their own life. And I feel like because it violates free speech, there was a potential there to take a stance against this law.
Yeah, do you think this would be a good case for them to say, hold on, this is where we draw the line?
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, I'm not a politician, but they could have argued that it was a broad stroke law and they didn't see that it applied here because this is art. The only silver lining really is that people are maybe reading about these laws that support abortion bans. I think we're slowly starting to see how the abortion bans are affecting other areas of our lives.
The ACLU of Idaho, and the National Coalition Against Censorship wrote a letter to Lewis Clark State College on behalf of Lydia, wanting the school to reconsider this censorship, as they put it. They have yet to respond, according to Lydia, and they've said nothing else other than that one-sentence statement they've sent to us. The exhibit will be up at the Center for Arts and History in Lewiston through April 23rd. Dog races, the Iditarod. We're going to do another check-in on our only Idahoan racing in the Iditarod. Let's see where Jed Stevenson and his 14 dogs are right now. And currently, the Sandpoint resident, 29, is that what I'm looking at? 29th out of 32. Looks like somebody dropped out of the race. Yep, since we last talked about this, which would have been yesterday. So he's moved up just a little bit, and so we got to keep encouraging him. Keep on going, Jed. All of Idaho is cheering you on, so keep mushing. You know, a lot of good comments sent in today during today's show. A lot of people talking about absentee ballots and mail carriers like this one. I'm a retired letter carrier, and I resent accusations of partisanship in ballot handling. How does he think we know a Republican ballot from a Democratic ballot, says Robin. Somebody else suggested, what do they have X-ray vision to look into these ballots to see which ones are which? I think our legislators need to be aware that Greater Idaho would include Oregonians who've had 25 years of mail-in voting. Living in rural areas is beneficial in their voting ability. That's an excellent point, by the way. I'm in my 70s and sick of standing in a line. Does that qualify for an absentee ballot? Asked BT in Boise. I don't know, probably not. I'm in a morning coffee group, and we never discuss library issues, LGBTQ issues, or voting fraud. A lot of talk about property taxes, though, grocery taxes, and government funding. Maybe the legislature should start dealing with the issues they were elected to solve, says Bob in Jerome. You know those coffee groups, they're pretty good. I realize I'm in a minority in this state. However, I still pay taxes and would really like to see some property tax relief, less interference in private lives, and much less interference from the Heritage Foundation, says Patty in Boise. And I'll leave you with this one today. I'm embarrassed to admit I was once registered as a Republican. What in the world has happened to the Republican Party I was previously proud of, says Steve Broden in Boise. We're getting a lot of that these days. A lot of people saying the same thing. We'll see what they say tomorrow. We'll see you then.